Hello and welcome to this webinar about the changes and updates to the Higg FEM 4.0. My name is Karin Ekberg and I'm the CEO of Leadership and Sustainability. I have long experience in the sustainability area. Leadership and Sustainability, we are a verifying body for Higg FEM and FSLM. We conduct SETI@C trainings and we also do a lot of strategy work, carbon footprinting, etc. Let me just give you also some information about the Zoom features today. You are all on mute today. We have a very, very large audience today, and therefore we have decided to put everyone on mute in order to ensure a really good audio quality. But you can send us your questions via the Q&A function, not via the chat, and please also don't raise your hand. It's better if you just use the Q&A function, and you can find it at the bottom of your screen. By selecting Q&A, you type your question and you click send. You will receive the presentation and the recording after this webinar. The materials here are copyrighted by Sustainable Apparel Coalition. Sustainable Apparel Coalition has developed this material, this content of Higg FEM 4.0 together with the SAC members. And the slides are copyrighted by Leadership and Sustainability. The agenda for today, I will first give you just an introduction to the Higg FEM 4.0 framework, and then I will give you an overview of the 137 new questions in the Higg FEM 4.0. We will also speak about quantitative data requirements for the Higg FEM 4.0. Why will we do that? Well, it's really important to have accurate quantitative data when you report into the Higg FEM, and in general, of course, as well, whenever you are reporting. And we have seen that there is sometimes a lack of understanding on how to do this. There is a lack of quality assurance internally within the facility before inserting the data into the Higg FEM, and we think that this is something that we need all of us to work on to improve the quality assurance and to improve the accuracy and the correctness of the data that is imported or inserted into the Higg FEM. We will also speak a bit about best practices in data management. Then we will talk a bit about leadership and sustainability and where we are available and can support you. And finally, we will have time for questions and a discussion. Higg FEM 4.0. Let me give you first an introduction. It is an improved version since Higg FEM 3.0, and a lot of work has gone into the development of the Higg FEM 4.0. It started already in mid-2020 to address various aspects that have been raised by members and by facilities. It also aligns with recent industry standards and best practices. There is a technical paper. You can download it here. It contains all the questions in the Higg FEM 4.0, and all the new questions have also been indicated. So you can see the entire full spectrum of questions in the Higg FEM 4.0 in that document. Here in this webinar, we will focus on the changes and the updates to the Higg FEM 4.0. The online module for Higg FEM 2023 of course, with the updated Higg FEM 4.0 will be available at the beginning of November 2023. And leadership and sustainability, we will provide trainings on the entire FEM 4.0. So please let us know if you are interested in those trainings. The FEM cycle, so this is now for 2023. And you can see here that, as usual, you should post your self-assessment by April 30, 2024. And if you post it later, you will not be able to unpost it again. Before April 30, you can post and unpost as many times as you wish your self-assessment, but after April 30, that is not possible anymore. The verification can take place throughout the entire year. You can begin even in January if you wish, and then until end of December 31st. After December 31st, 2024, you will not be able to post your module anymore. So that's really important. We see that every year that there are facilities that are missing this deadline. We usually try to contact you, but it's not always possible to do so. And in any case, so this is the cycle that you have. So it's the same basically as the one we have also for the 2022 cycle. And now let me give you a high-level updates into the Higg FEM 4.0 for the different sections. So for site info and permit, there is one important change. There is an additional scenario for 0 points in the total FEM score, and that's related to permits. This means that if you don't have an operating license that is valid anymore, or your permits are not valid anymore, then you can still complete the self-assessment, but your score will be 0. So you will receive 0 points in your FEM. Then the facility profile structure has been considerably revamped. There are lots of a much different structure right now. In the EMS, in the environmental management system, there are changes to applicability questions and to pathways. And for energy, greenhouse gas emissions, and actually for water as well, you will now report annual volume, energy and water consumption by your facility type. This means that if you have a vertical setup, then you will have 2 facility types. For example, garment making, cut and sew, and let's say a dye house. And in this case, you will report these consumption values for both these facility types. And also you will report your annual volume separately. Then for energy and greenhouse gas emissions, a lot of questions have been added related to energy attribute certificates, carbon offsets, coal phase out, fossil phase out, etc. For water, there are now questions related to groundwater management and usage questions. Rainwater harvesting questions have been added. Regarding wastewater management, there are questions added related to on-site wastewater biological treatment and wastewater sludge management. In the areas section, that section has been significantly revamped, and the questions are now repositioned and aligned with the ZEHC air emission position paper. Then we have waste management. The questions related to hazardous waste management and non-hazardous waste management are separated. The questions are added related to circular systems for production waste. There is in the chemicals management section, some questions have been repositioned, and there are also a few new questions there. So a comparison between the Higg FEM 3.0 and Higg FEM 4.0. Both of them have a standardized environmental performance measurement that is intended to drive improvements. That has always been the intention with the SAC and its members, to make sure that there are continuous improvements in the facility performance based on the Higg FEM. And that's also why we have a lot of challenging questions. Perhaps you're not able to respond to all questions today, but perhaps in a few years you will be there. So there is always room for improvement and continuous improvement. There are still 7 impact areas, and the scoring methodology is very similar. There are just a few additional rules, and I will mention them a bit later. The levels are still 3 levels: the awareness raising, the baselines and targets, and then the aspirational practices. And regarding the level advancing methodology, you still need to respond to all questions at level 1 with a yes or a partial yes in order to be able to move on to levels 2 and 3. There are now 23 pathways tailored to facilities across multiple industry sectors and also tiers. The verification methodology, there will be an updated verification protocol with more guidance and guardrails. And here you see the overview of the sections. So this has not changed. We have the same number of sections as we have had previously. The scoring methodology, there are 3 levels of questions. At the first level, you can reach 25 points. At the second level, you can reach 50 points. And at the third level, you can reach another 25 points. These points may be redistributed based on your applicability. And so, for example, if you're a light water user, if you only use maximum 35 cubic meter per day, then you will only respond to the questions at level 1. And in that case, all the points, the 100 points, are attributed to level 1. If you don't have a valid business license or environmental permits, you will get a 0 score. And here you see the overview of the levels 1, 2, and 3. The applicability methodology, Higg FEM is really applicable now for multiple industry sectors and tiers. The questions are then defined based on the applicability, and there are 23 different pathways that you can have. The verification methodology, as I mentioned, the verification protocol will be revised. And what is also very important for you to be aware of is that due to the much higher number of total questions in the Higg FEM 4.0, the verification time will be increased. It's difficult to say exactly how much. There will be guidance in the verification protocol, but there will be a significant more time needed for the verifications. There is also a consistent process with added guidance, and the verification updates and has been updated based on stakeholder feedback. All right, so let's go to the Higg FEM 4.0, the new questions here. So for site info and permit, we have in total 4 new questions. Does your facility operate within an industry zone or park? How many employees are engaged in the operation and regular maintenance of the water treatment processes? Is this facility's greenhouse gas emissions included in a broader corporate disclosure? What reporting platform is used? For example, CDP or corporate website. And now all the other sections, we have the same structure in our presentation. For every section, we will first give an overview of the updates. And after that, we will give just a few examples of the new questions, including the corresponding question number. These may change with final revisions of the Higg FEM 4.0, but anyway, we give the question number so that you can orient yourself also in the technical paper. Just to be clear, we only give examples. Today, we will not be able to cover all questions in the Higg FEM 4.0. For that, we would need 1 or 2 or 3 days, and we will provide trainings later on for all of you who are interested in that. Now, to the environmental management system. The summary of the new questions. There are new questions related to environmental policies, training and awareness, soil and groundwater contamination assessment and prevention, increased employee training evaluations and post-training assessments, detailed contamination reporting, action plans and legal notices. So this is related to soil and groundwater contamination. And then there are also some improved questions related to environmental management systems. And some examples. In total, there are 11 new questions. All are at level 1. Does your facility have a company environmental policy? Does your facility provide training to employees on environmental and company environmental management strategy? And finally, question 10, can you please confirm there is no soil and or groundwater contamination in your facility? And I want to stress the importance of this question. This is a topic that we have not really handled previously. We have done it indirectly by asking about chemicals management practices, wastewater practices, etc. But here we really want to pinpoint down on soil and groundwater contamination. This is a really important topic. In Europe and in Americas, there have already been a lot of focus on this topic over the past decades. A lot of cleanup has been done of contaminated land sites. But in some regions of the world, this has not been such a significant topic yet. It is an important topic for the textile sector, especially in the facilities where wet processes are used. So what is the problem here? First of all, it's very difficult to delineate and understand what is my pollution, where is my pollution, do I really have a pollution or a contamination. You may see it, for example, if you have stains on the underground or within your factory, you can see if you have stains and then there might be a risk, or if you have underground tanks, for example. But then the other problem is also that it is really difficult to clean up a soil and groundwater contamination. And the biggest risk is, of course, that you would have polluted groundwater reserves, perhaps even potable water reservoirs. So that's why we have added this question into the Higg FEM this time. Now, energy and greenhouse gas emissions. Summary of the new questions. There is an enhanced certification and emission factor tracking for biomass certification. You can report separate greenhouse gas emission factors for power and heat sources, and also company vehicle energy sources. Questions related to carbon offset and energy use tracking. There are carbon offset purchases, energy use tracking, domestic production, energy distinction, so differentiating between the energy consumption for domestic and for production, and also separate renewable and non-renewable reporting. Energy audits, science-based targets, and renewable energy implementation. We have had questions about science-based targets even in the previous Higg FEM. But today these questions are scored. So far they have not been scored. Now they are scored. And so some examples at level 1, select all sources of energy fuel for company-owned and controlled vehicles. Many facilities have already reported the consumption of fuel for their own vehicles. But now we have also seen that some facilities do not, and therefore this specific question has been added. At level 2, has an energy audit been conducted at your facility within the last 5 years? And at level 3, does your facility have a plan to phase out any fossil fuel other than coal? So in the lower levels, there is a question about phasing out coal, and this question focuses on other fossil fuel types than coal. Now over to water, and water has also been revamped quite significantly because now we are differentiating for different types of water. Blue water, which is surface water sources, green water, which is soil water critical for plant growth and agriculture, brown water, polluted wastewater that requires treatment, grey water, wastewater from washing and rinsing, and black water, which may be from domestic water from toilets, for example. And a summary of the new questions. We are now also included rejected water from pretreatment and including also rejected water measurements, monitoring and reducing water consumption, differentiating between domestic and production use, and also adherence to groundwater restrictions and leak monitoring. Water efficiency and conservation plans, increasing grey water use, reducing absolute blue water use, and eliminate or reduce groundwater use. And the last one here, implementing leading technologies as well. External reporting is also an area, for example, to set science-based targets on water. So far you have been asked about setting science-based targets for greenhouse gas emission, and now we have a similar question related to water as well. Some examples, in total 21 new questions. At level 1, does your facility track water use from each water source your facility utilizes? Has your facility increased grey water use for any sources compared with your baseline? Can your facility demonstrate that you have reduced your overall absolute blue water use? So this question is now at level 3. Wastewater management. Now, monitoring wastewater quality, BOD level, BOD 5 level is encouraged. There are questions related to the biological treatment sub-processes, the treatment plant functioning, and collaborating with off-site ETP to improve treatment processes. Tracking wastewater sludge, industrial and domestic sources, and manage the distinct sources of wastewater sludge. Sludge management and documentation, and then compliance and testing as well. And some examples. At level 1, does your facility monitor the BOD 5 level of your wastewater? At level 2, does your facility maintain manifests or similar documentation of the handling, transporting, processing, and disposal of sludge? And accounting also for all domestic sludge generating at the facility. At level 3, does your facility engage, collaborate with your off-site wastewater treatment plant to improve their wastewater treatment and or engage in recycling? So this question we had in a similar form, but it's another question, and that question is if you have asked about the test results from the off-site wastewater treatment plant. And many of us will feel a bit awkward about asking such a question to the external wastewater treatment plant. Many of them are run and operated by authorities. So we feel uncomfortable in asking authorities about their treatment plans, because usually the authorities, they monitor us and they check in on us. So therefore it is a bit awkward to do that. But the idea here is really that you make sure that your wastewater is treated the way it should be treated. So it's only about that. It's not about you controlling the authorities at all, but it's about engaging with them. And in this new question here, it is really about collaborating with your off-site wastewater treatment plant in order to make sure that your wastewater is treated in the most efficient way. Air emissions. And here first a comment from my side. If you do not have any facility operation or production air emissions, then you do not need to complete the air emission section. Many of you will still have at least a boiler, so many of you will still have to report into the air emission section. And then there are now questions related to compliance and inventories. Inventories for air emission sources, compliance with legal requirements, permitting and reporting, testing and monitoring. Refrigerant management. We already had questions about refrigerants previously, but now these questions have been expanded and are more detailed. Emission reduction plans as well. This is new, tracking and reducing emissions, best available technologies to adopt industry guidelines and utilize BAT. And here are some examples. At level 1, the question 1, has your facility created an inventory of all point source air emission sources at your facility? And I actually like this question because it is much easier if you make a proper inventory of all source air emission that you have. Then it will be much easier for you to respond to all questions in this section, because it makes sure that you have a clear understanding of where the air emissions are generated in your facility and what type of air emissions you have and where they are emitted. So are they fugitive emissions that perhaps are just distributed in the factory or in the room where you have that particular production step? Or is it, are the emissions directed out via a point source, via a stack, for example? At level 2, does your facility track the total annual emissions quantities of key pollutants from all point source emissions from facility operations? At level 3, has your facility made progress on your implementation plan to reduce air emissions from facility operations in the reporting year? Waste. Some of the waste questions are new, but some have also been rephrased or edited a bit in the meantime. Regarding segregation and tracking, non-hazardous and hazardous waste are separated, and there is also now validation of final disposal of all waste categories. Employee training. Now there are questions about training and knowledge evaluation. So a post-training evaluation in order to make sure that the training has really been effective. So you can do that by an exam or by a quiz, for example. Then baseline and targets, circular economy, participation and approach description, and some examples here. At level 1, does your facility track each non-hazardous waste stream your facility generates? We already had the question about tracking, but it was not checked. Do you really track each non-hazardous waste stream that you generate? At level 2, question 17, which waste disposal methods are used for your facility's wastes? And then at level 3, question 28, does your facility validate the final disposal or treatment of all non-hazardous wastes? Chemicals management. There are questions about policies, about written policies and purchasing criteria, about responsibilities and competence, assigned staff and required competences, and then related to RSL, restricted substances list, and manufacturing restricted substances list, MRSL compliance. There is now also hazard-based selection and employee training, and also the Higg FEM 4.0 has now a better alignment also for hard goods factories. However, the MRSL questions may not be applicable to the hard goods sector. If you don't have an MRSL available to you, then these questions will not be applicable to your facility. Collaboration and transparency, industry programs and stakeholder engagement. And here's some examples. So at question 2, at level 1, question 2, have you assigned the responsibility of implementing and maintaining the chemical management system to a team or staff member? At level 2, does your facility have the following capabilities and authority in your chemicals management systems team? And this is about knowledge, about authority, and in-house testing. At level 3, do you have a transparency policy or procedure in which you share information regarding chemical products, chemical waste, and wastewater with stakeholders? For example, with ZTHC, with chemical formulators. And now let me also cover quantitative data requirements. And I have quite a lot of material related to quantitative data. So why is this important? Well, we have in the Higg FEM 4.0, we have a lot of new quantitative parameters that you are asked to report on. For example, segregating for domestic and production use, etc. And we have seen in the previous years for the Higg FEM that there are lots of errors in the quantitative data. I'm sorry to say this, but during nearly every verification we do, we revise at least some numbers in the quantitative data reports. And so, but the importance is, of course, many of you are now reporting according to science-based targets, or you have brands or retailers who are asking you to report your scope 1, your scope 2, your scope 3 emissions. So this is very important then that these numbers are correct, that you report. If you imagine that you have a significant error, and we have seen factor 1,000 wrong, where, for example, the greenhouse gas emissions were 1,000 times higher as reported than what they were in reality. And you can imagine that even a big brand, if you have a factor 1,000 wrong, too much, if you report too much greenhouse gas emissions, this will impact the brand report as well. And of course, your programs will not be well adjusted. And so you always have to ask yourself, does this number, does it really make sense? And so quantitative data requirements are very important. So the accuracy of the data needs to be checked. And there are key quantitative data categories actually in all sections of the Higg FEM. In the technical paper that I already mentioned, and you can see the link here again, at page 38 and forward, you can find all the data that needs to be reported according to Higg FEM 4.0. Here, in this presentation, we focus on the numerical data, on the quantitative data only. In the site info and permit section, operating days in the year, total full-time and temporary employees, the facility annual volume, and here you will be asked to report differently. If you have a vertical setup where you have a garment factory and a wet processing unit, then you have two different facility types, and your annual volume can be reported for the garment and for the wet processing entity separately. In the EMS section, we have number of employees trained, the frequency of the training. In the energy and greenhouse gas section, we have energy attribute certificates that you have purchased, carbon offsets that you have purchased. We have the overall energy usage. We have the scope 3 greenhouse gas calculation and quantity. We have details on the approved science-based targets for greenhouse gas if you as a facility has actually developed this yourself. And in the water section, overall water consumption per year, water sources used annually, and if you use water in production, you are asked to track and document water consumption separately between domestic and production use. Documentation of the water usage, and now in the wastewater section, tracking wastewater volume by domestic, industrial, or combined, separate sources of wastewater sludge, how many distinct sources of wastewater sludge, percentage of solids in this wastewater sludge, the quantity of industrial and domestic reused and recycled water, and quantity of industrial wastewater reused for production, quantity of industrial wastewater recycled for production, quantity of domestic wastewater recycled for domestic purposes, air emissions, annual pollutant emissions from facility operations, annual pollutant emissions from production. In the waste management section, to document the overall waste generated by each waste stream, the annual generation, as we have been doing so far as well, but now for all of them, training to employees whose work involves hazardous waste handling, the number of employees, the frequency of the training, the document the quantity of waste based on disposal method. In the chemical section, training on chemical hazards, etc. So the number of employees trained, the frequency of the training, and we have also a chemical spill and emergency response plan, the number of employees trained, the frequency of the training. And now let me also cover some best practices. The units of measurement, that you need to be consistent with your units of measurement. So if you always measure cubic meter, then always use cubic meter. If you always measure kilowatt hours, then always use kilowatt hours, etc. Just to be consistent. So don't change back and forth between different units, please. Then regular data collection and reporting. I would say at least on a monthly basis to do this. And use technology to reduce errors, train employees on data accuracy, make invoices and calculations available to verifiers. Please prepare this. In nearly every verification, we have to ask separately for this. We have sometimes to wait in order to receive this, this information. We are asked as verifiers to specifically verify and check in on the quantitative data that you report. And we are asked how we do that. So please help us here and make everything available to us. Then my suggestion is to use an Excel table with all data and calculations year by year. Just have one spreadsheet. You can have many different tabs and you can structure it as you wish. But please make sure that you have everything captured there. So we spend a lot of time in verifications trying to understand how you have calculated, how you have aggregated, Perhaps, for example, waste invoices. You have them for several different categories, but when you report into the Higg FEM, you cluster some of the different waste categories. And then if you don't remember how you have done that, that's quite difficult to try to find out afterwards. So please write everything down in your Excel sheet. Write your assumptions down, write how you aggregate and consolidate different parameters. Write down how you normalize. Write down how you set your targets. Write down your comparison if you have improved last year. And so this one table is really, really crucial, and I cannot emphasize that enough. All right, so effective data-driven decision-making. Analyze the data to identify areas for improvement, set realistic improvement targets, and also developing action plans based on data insights is really important. Engage stakeholders to ensure alignment and support. Why don't you ask someone internally to do quality review of your quantitative data? Ask someone from operations, someone who is really good at numbers, or someone from the financial department. And that will be a good help for you if you do that. Then regularly, of course, review and adjust plans and targets. So don't do it on an annual basis, because then you will miss your targets, or it will be just your best luck if you reach them or not. And best practices: invest in reliable equipment, the regular data collection, scheduled periodic reporting, establish a data collection record. I spoke about the Excel table already. Employee training, importance of the accuracy of data, measurement tools and methodologies, benchmarking, compare data to industry standards. So even just asking yourself, does this number make sense? If you have a greenhouse gas emission with a factor of 1,000 too high, you should be able to find out. You should be able to go to the internet and just compare numbers and see what is a typical greenhouse gas emission report from a facility similar to mine. And then you should find out if you have such a factor wrong. There is also in the Worldy platform, you can do benchmarking. So once you have posted your module, it is possible to do benchmarking of your facility results. Identify areas for improvement, and then use data insights for decision making. Drive continuous improvement. And we see that in some countries where there is a very strict and comprehensive legal setup in the environmental area, sometimes we hear the argument, well, we have the legislation, we follow the legislation, we are fine. And then when we ask about goals and targets, there are no targets. There are no energy saving targets, there are no water saving targets, there is no control of wastewater, etc. And in terms of trying to reduce the wastewater load, for example. And so please use targets. It's something that is really effective to use in order to drive improvements. And there is always room for improvement. Of course, if you have already been working on energy conservation measures for 10 years and you have already done a lot, implemented a lot of new technology, etc., your room for improvement will be smaller than for a facility that has not done anything so far. But I believe that there is always some room for improvement. External audits, engage third-party experts. We already heard that you will have the question if you have conducted an energy audit in the past 5 years. So this is also an opportunity to improve your performance. Ensure accuracy and compliance. And then here is just some general information. This is not specifically only to numerical data. But Higg FEM can be reported against the Greenhouse Gas Protocol for Scope 1 and Scope 2 of the facility. It can also be reported against the Science-Based Target Initiative for Scope 1 and Scope 2 of the facility. So you can use the Scope 1 and 2 emissions that are calculated in your Higg FEM. And Higg FEM also applies to adjacent industries. So it is really quite agnostic. Many sectors, even outside these industries, can use the Higg FEM. But what has been made sure is that the hard goods sector can use Higg FEM as well. Outdoor sporting goods, for example. And now some specific data or information about how to report based on the facility types. So, and this applies to the energy and the water section. And you see here on the left-hand side, you see two different facility types. The first one is a vertical integrated facility, for example, with a finished product assembler and material production. And the other one is a cut and sew facility, which is then falls under the finished product assembler type. And now how do you report on energy and water quantitative data? So there is actually a default installed here now in the Higg FEM 4.0. So for a vertically integrated facility, you need to report your consumption data, your baseline, your targets, and your achievements, both in finished product assembler and in material production. So this data you will need to report twice, for finished product assembler and for material production. So you still work in the same module. You don't use another module. You still work in the same overall Higg FEM module, but because in the facility profile you have added these two types of facilities, then you will also need to report separately or disaggregated here. And then for the cut and sew facility, we'll just report according to the finished product assembler. And there is also a new feature for annual volume calculation. So your annual unit will be used to normalize all baselines, targets, and reductions in the energy, water, and waste sections. And the main unit options are unit, so piece or pair, you produce 1 million t-shirts, for example, and kilograms. But this you will not have the choice here, and I will explain why a bit later. And these are based on the facility type, and they will be pre-populated. And then you can also, on a voluntary basis, you can report for meter, standard allowed minutes, etc. Excuse me, as well. And here now you can see the default unit of measurement for the annual volume, excuse me. And then we have, so for finished product assembler and finished product processing, in both of these cases, you will always report in units, so piece or pair. 500,000 pairs of shoes, for example, or 1 million units of t-shirts. But for all the other facility types, you will report in kilogram. So you will not be reporting in yards or square yards anymore. You will be reporting in kilograms. And then regarding the performance metrics, so where you are reporting year-on-year improvement, you will be reported a score for both year-on-year improvement and improvement against the baseline. So if you meet both of them, then you will get a full point. If you meet only one of them, you will receive partial points only. So it's new. You will need to report both year-on-year improvement and an improvement against baseline. And this makes the baselining even more important than previously. We see that some facilities change their baseline nearly every year. This is not the idea with baselining. Baselining is there in order to also define more mid-term or long-term goals and targets. So you make a baseline in 2022, for example, and you set a target for 2025, 2026, 2027, or perhaps even 2030. And you keep the baseline. So you should not go and change the baseline all the time. because then it is really difficult for you to compare and see, am I really improving not only year by year, but also in a longer time period. And this is also aligned with the Science-Based Target Initiative, where you set one baseline and then you set your target perhaps for 2030, for example. And now we are finished with the actual content about the Higg FEM 4.0, and I want to tell you something about leadership and sustainability. So you can see on this map here where we are available for you to support you. And here you can see our list of Higg FEM verifiers. So in all of these countries, we have local verifiers, and you can see the numbers. We also have a lot of chemical specialist verifiers on our team, and we have several trainers as well. And as you know, for Higg FEM, we are allowed to travel. So we can travel to your country as well. The travel costs may be higher than if you would have a local verifier, but sometimes it still pays off. Sometimes it makes sense if you perhaps have several facilities in several different countries and you would like to have a consistent verification approach with only one verifying body, then it also makes sense to have the verifiers traveling. But as you see, we are located in many countries already. And here you can see some of our verifiers. We have more than 25 verifiers globally, and you see some of them here. If you are interested to buy a verification, for example, in China, you should contact Simon Tang. You click on the link there and you will be able to send an email to him. And in some other cases, for some countries, the person who where you will send an email is a different person than what you can see the name here, depending on who is responsible for the sales in that respective country. And you can always contact me as well if you would like to have a verification in a different country. All right, and then for the Higg FEM 2022, the one that you have probably already posted your self-assessment, perhaps you are in the process of verifying right now. If you still need guidance and understanding, you can go and listen to our public webinars about the Higg FEM 2022. And here you can see some of our team members globally. And now with that, I would like to lead over to our question session. And I have seen that we have received many, many questions. We have so many people joining this webinar. Thanks so much for everyone, to everyone who is joining. And now I will cover the questions as much as I can. The questions that I'm not able to cover now live, I will send you later a Q&A document with the additional questions. Okay, let's see the questions that we have received. May I know if leadership and sustainability has the capacity to support factories to develop ISO 14001 system? Yes, we do have that capacity. So please reach out to us and we will help you there. And then please share the technical paper. So there is a link in this presentation where you can download the technical paper. And we will also share the presentation deck and we will share the recording after this webinar. Tentatively, when will the How to Higg be released? I believe it will be released towards end of August, beginning of September, more or less. What are the key things to mention into an environmental policy? Good question. Please go and look at the ISO 14001 standard. In that standard, it's specified what should be included in a policy. And I think that guidance from ISO 14001 is quite good. So it's quite useful, really. How does the new Q10 EMS sections questions on soil and groundwater contamination, how is it different from similar questions on illegal waste disposal and not treated wastewater discharge in respective sections? Well, they are connected, we can say, because of course, if you have an illegal waste disposal on your site, let's say you are putting hazardous waste on your site, it's raining, and perhaps there will be a contamination due to that. And the same also for wastewater, untreated wastewater. If you have a leakage in the pipes, etc., you may contaminate soil and groundwater. So therefore, we have some preventative measures and some questions related to preventative measures already in the Higg FEM. But here we really want to know, do you understand if you have soil and groundwater on your site? And we want to raise that topic to the front so that people are made more aware, and that you as a facility also check what is the situation at my facility. And remember, if you have been operating perhaps at your facility for many decades already, it may be that today you have really proper procedures for everything, but perhaps the situation was different 50 years ago. What kind of proof is required to show that there is no soil and groundwater contamination? Well, this will be outlined in the How to Higg guidance exactly what is required. So I cannot tell you that right now. Can you please explain about biomass certification? No, I cannot. Please check the How to Higg guide once it is published. There will be specific guidance then related to biomass certification. There are similar questions across energy, water, waste section that I could not distinguish clearly on how they are different. So for example, the question 10, 11, and 12, 3 of these questions seem to ask about baselining. So how are they different? Well, in the water section, you are asked for domestic use, for production, and for combined. So these questions will cover all these 3 different cases. And the reason is that you can then really differentiate also in your target setting, because perhaps your domestic water use is a bit more difficult to reduce consumption. Of course, you can use better taps, and you can use dual flushing techniques, etc., in your toilets. But perhaps the biggest potential to reduce your water consumption is in your production. So therefore, if you separate it, it's easier also to drive improvements there. For wastewater, question 2, why does the facility need to monitor BOD 5 but not just BOD? What is the intention of this question? I actually don't know exactly what is the intention here. I guess it's more important just to specify also the type of biological load that you might have. And then the SPT and CDP report, is it okay if we apply at corporate level and all facilities that belong to the company can use the corporate report of CDP and SPT target as their own? Yes, that is okay. I believe that your mother company, if you have several facilities that are belonging to the same mother company, I believe that your mother company would like you to adhere to their science-based targets, and probably they have set it based on what they know about your facilities as well. And so it would not make sense for you to define a science-based target of your own. But of course, you need to align with that. So you need to basically support your mother company to reach its science-based target. And the same for the CDP report. If your group or mother company is reporting according to CDP, your data should be included into that report, and it wouldn't make sense for you to do a separate CDP report. Of course, now I cannot speak for all companies. They themselves need to decide how they want their individual facilities to report, but this would be my general guidance, and I guess that most companies have done it as well. Okay, fossil fuel phase out also for raw materials. No, as far as I know, not. It's really about the energy sources that you are using in the facility. Is rainwater considered under blue water? Yes, I would say so. And then please share a template for air emission inventory. I will see if I can find an air emission template. It was previously, there was one available in the How to Higg, and if so, we will send that out to you as well. Can you give examples of which tiers, factories, and kind of manufacturing processes that will not need to fill out their emission section? Well, it might be a smaller facility that doesn't have a boiler and no other emissions. So if there are no production steps in the facility that are using chemicals, for example, that have no air emissions within the factory, and you also don't have a boiler, no heating, ventilation, etc., then you would not need to report. But as soon as you have, for example, at least the boiler, then you would not, you will need to report. Hi, Karin. Did I understand well that we should buy our verification for the Higg till 31st of October 2023? Yes, I did mention this previously, but it seems that your verification module is already included in your package, but please check that. If you need to buy a verified module still, then the deadline would be October 31st. But please check that on your portal. Perhaps you already have your verified module. Can you please explain hard goods meaning in textile? Yes. So hard goods is not textile, but hard goods products may include textile fabrics as well. So hard goods could be, for example, a bicycle, could be a tent, then the construction itself would be made out of, for example, some polymer, or it may be made out of metal. And then, of course, you have the cover of the tent, and that is made out of a textile. So this is one example where you have a hard goods product. So bicycles or other products, backpacks, maybe other examples as well. Is scope 3 calculated for group considered for individual factories, and how to segregate for individual factories? Yes, so if a mother company wanted to calculate their scope 3 emissions, then they would have contacted you as well in order to understand your scope 3 emissions. So your emissions should already be included into the group level calculations. And then how to segregate for the individual factories? Well, I guess you already had reported your emissions, so then you have it at the individual facility level. If you don't have it, then you need to find a method on how to segregate it yourself. And so it's very difficult to give guidance here. There are many methods you could of how to do that, but that is goes a bit beyond what we can cover today. Does domestic cleaning products used for cleaning surfaces, toilets, etc., are they classified as chemicals? They actually are. So we are asked by Sumera to ask that you report all chemicals that are used on site. Another tricky question here. This seems to be very difficult to follow each data when you have a small factory. It requires important human resources and investments. Does Higg FEM take into account the size of the facility in the score? And my question is, no, in most cases not. The only exception is the water section, where if you are a light water user, then you only report your quantities, the consumption that you have, and you do not need to set targets, etc. So there it is taken into account. But in all other sections, you will still need to report and respond to all questions, depending, of course, on the applicability path that you have been designed to or assigned. And so there is actually not, there is no taking into account of that for you, unfortunately. If you have never completed the Higg FEM, if you are totally new to the Higg FEM, then you can use the foundational module. And the foundational module includes a much smaller number of questions into the module. Okay, and then where can I find the industry benchmarks? Well, on the Worldly platform, you can find the benchmarks there. So it should be possible when you are logged in and you can see your dashboard. There it should be possible to see where the benchmarking is, and if not, it may be at the top of the screen. But you will find it on the Worldly platform, and you can do it only after you have posted your self-assessment. And of course, you can benchmark your verified module as well after you have posted your verified module. Okay, if a factory has cut and sew, which is assembler, and embroidery and panel printing, in this case, do we need to report data separately? Yes, the printing would be yet another facility than the assembler type, and therefore you would need to report the quantitative data for energy and water separately. We have weaving and cut and sew operation in the same facility. Then how can I report annual volume quantity? Well, how I understand it is that with the cut and sew operation, you would report in units, let's say 5 million t-shirts. And for weaving, you would report in kilogram. For annual volume, if we are vertically integrated with fabric and garment making, but fabric accounts for more than 70% of the greenhouse gas or resources consumption, it makes sense to have a denominator in terms of fabric output instead of final product output. What is your opinion? Yes, exactly. And that is what is now possible. Since you will have two different facility types, you will report your annual volume once for the garment factory and once for your fabric production. And then, of course, you will have the corresponding denominator. If a stakeholder asks to show about absolute reduction 2025-2030, reporting data in FEM as normalized, how does this work and support? So you have in your Higg FEM, you have reported with normalized data, but the stakeholder asks for absolute reduction, absolute numbers. Then you need to do this separately. So you will need to pull out a separate report and report to that stakeholder then in absolute numbers. So there is no other possibility to do this actually. Suppose a factory has only a standby generator. How will the new air emission section applies for control measures, etc.? Yes, this is a bit of a tricky situation actually, but you need to, it will apply because you may be using the standby generator. Let's say you have a power outfall, a power shortage, then you will need to use your standby generator, so you will have air emissions there. Now, of course, it's very difficult for you to have control measures and everything like that. So actually, I think this is a really good question, and perhaps you can reach out to SAC and ask about this situation, how this will be evaluated. Okay, and then how much more time will be provided, as you have mentioned? Well, and I guess that you are thinking about the verification time that I was talking about. I cannot tell you how much. There will be more guidance coming out in the verification protocol to us on how to calculate the verification time we need. But in any case, there will be significantly more time because, as you can see, there are lots of more questions and some of them are really complex. We'll need a lot of data to review in order to verify as well. What is the required qualification for the internal external energy auditor? Well, I cannot tell you just like that. You will need to check in the How to Higg, or also, for example, in the ISO 50001 standards. And also here is a question, can we consider ISO 50001 as the energy audit? I believe you can, but please check the How to Higg once it is published. Please suggest if an energy audit and carbon and water footprints are a prerequisite for the FEM verification and its periodicity. So a prerequisite, you don't need to do it. You will just not score any points for these questions if you haven't done it. So it's not that you must do it in order to be able to verify. And the periodicity is for the energy audit. The question is, have you conducted an energy audit in the past 5 years? For carbon and water footprints, these are annual. So you, in the Higg FEM, you always report for a total calendar year. So right now, we are reporting in Higg FEM 2022. So you are reporting for the total for the total calendar year of 2022. If a facility has less than 10 employees and who is not required to have a factory license as per the Factories Act, so how to go for the FEM assessment? In your country, if you have this regulation that you don't need a factory license if you have less than 10 employees, then in the site info and permit section, my idea would be to say a yes to the question if you have a license, and then write an explanation there and why it is like that. For integrated factory, those have a lot of processes like dyeing, trims, printing in the same premises. It is tough to assess KPI in normalized or per kilogram or pieces. I think it would be better if the KPI option would be individual for individual processes. I totally understand you, and you are allowed to voluntarily report with other KPIs as well or with other normalization factors. But SAC has decided to use only kilogram and pieces for the overall reporting here. Can we import data 2022 to 2023? So far, it has always been possible to roll over data into the next year's module. For the FEM 2023, I cannot guarantee. I guess it will be, but I actually don't know. We would need to ask SAC and Sumera about this. How can we measure our air emission? By installing a measurement device or by calculating the burnt fuel? Yes, there are many different options on how to do that. Either you can estimate by calculating burnt fuel, or you can actually measure. You can have a continuous measurement, or you can also just make a spot measurement, a one-time measurement, and then do your calculations according to that. So there are many ideas on how to do that. And if I remember correctly, the How to Higg actually includes some guidance related to how to do these measurements or estimates. Even though initiatives such as using low flow tap or using automated sensors have been implemented, reducing absolute blue water use for cut and sew factories will be a major challenge, especially if the number of employees keep increasing. Yes, I totally understand you. It is a challenge, and if you have an increasing number of employees, for your internal monitoring, you can, of course, normalize with the number of employees, which makes sense because probably most of the water you use for domestic purposes is really related to the number of employees you have. But it might be challenging, but you will see. Perhaps there are awareness raising measures you can do or some installations that you can do. Then, sorry, I might have missed, what is the deadline for Higg FEM 4.0 training? Well, I don't think there is a deadline for the training at all. But if you are asking when it will be available, I would say towards August, September. As soon as the How to Higg has been published, we will be allowed to conduct proper and detailed Higg FEM 4.0 training. So obviously, in this webinar, we can only cover some examples of new questions. Is ISO 14001 training mandatory for EMS? No, it isn't. If you have an ISO 14001 certificate, then you will have a very easy task to respond to the EMS questions because most of them are really very much aligned with the ISO 14001. Could you give me a definition of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, please? Yes, I can do that. Scope 1 are the greenhouse gas emissions that are generated from on-site burning of a fuel, for example, of natural gas or of oil. So if you have a boiler, then you will have scope 1 emissions, most probably if it isn't an electric boiler. But if you are using natural gas or oil, or any other energy source, then you will have scope 1 emissions from your boiler. Scope 2, the best example is electricity that you buy. The energy has been generated outside of your facility, so the emissions are being generated outside your facility, but you are using the energy on site. And these are scope 2 emissions. It can also be, for example, if you are using cooling water or if you are using steam, for example, that you buy from external, then the emissions that are generated in the production of this steam or cold water are also related to scope 2 emissions. Scope 3 is the most complex portion of the greenhouse gas emissions. Scope 3 can be a lot of different categories. It can be, for example, it can be transporting, it can be the materials that you buy to your factory, it can be the use of sold products, it can be the end of life of sold products, it can be investing, and several other categories as well. You can go to the greenhouse gas protocol and have a look there about all the details about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. In what unit should we give the annual shipped quantity volume if we are into garment factory industry? Then the volume will be units, or pieces. So you will be, for example, 10,000 pair of shoes or 5,000 t-shirts. Will Higg FEM 4.0 will it be implemented in 2023? So means our 2022 data will be verified on the new Higg FEM 4.0. No, that is not the case. Your 2022 data and your self-assessment will be verified according to the FEM 3.0. So it's only for the 2023 data and the 2023 cycle with the FEM 2023 that the Higg FEM 4.0 will be applied. But the Higg FEM 4.0 will be available on the portal, on the Worldly portal, from November onwards, 2023. During calculation of KPI, the shipment product data should be considered. How much is produced from the individual process unit instead of considering shipment data to get the real resource consumption against practical production? Yes, so your comment is, it's not really a question, it's a comment. You say that currently FEM is asking to report on the shipped product data, and you say that you would like to have the produced data instead. I actually understand your concern very much. But this is how SAC has decided to do it, that it should be the shipped data. And most of the time, it's more or less the same. And the question about vertical setup, I think we have covered that now. We are a unit where we discharge a threshold less than 15 cubic meter, I guess, per day. Do we need to go for a ZTHC water test? We have been losing marks because we are not doing the ZTHC water test report, even though we are not required. Yes, so this is a situation that you may have related to many questions. You know that the Higg FEM doesn't cover only legal requirements. The Higg FEM has always been thought to be an aspirational tool in order to improve performance beyond what the regulation asks you to. Excuse me. So we really want facilities to continuously improve and go far beyond the local regulations, to set targets and to improve in any areas. And now there is no distinction for smaller units. And so there is not a possibility where you can say, this question is not applicable to me. You will still need to respond to this question. And unfortunately, in your case, if you cannot do the ZTHC wastewater test, then you will actually lose points there. Okay, so these were the questions that I could cover in today. We are out of time now, and but there are some additional questions, and so we will respond to them in a written format after this webinar. And with that, I would like to thank you so much for joining such a large audience today. It has been really inspiring for me to be part of this webinar and to present this content to you. And so I just have one call out to you: be a sustainability leader, choose leadership and sustainability to support you. All right, goodbye for now. Bye-bye.